Hello, I'm Todd Phillips, the editor of Canadian Auto Dealer. We're here today with Luciano Butera, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Tradex. It's a new trading platform that's helping car dealers sell vehicles on a global scale. So, Luciano, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Well, my colleague Karina had touched base with yourself and Ryan earlier this year, and but there's been some news, that we're going to get to in a moment. But I thought it'd be a good place to start is if you just refresh our audience about the company and the platform that you're offering to car dealers.
Sure, happy to do that. So, what Tradex is really an online platform which allows dealers, importers, fleet companies, mobility providers to post vehicles for sale or to source vehicles to buy, and not just within their own market, but within markets across the world. Of course, making sure that the vehicles are admissible for the markets that they intend to supply.
And we'll get to the technology in a little bit, but I mean, just that whole process of selling at a global scale is a massively complex undertaking. I guess your aim is to make that a lot simpler to help sort of facilitate that and ease the friction in that global trading process in terms of regulation and currencies and all that, right? So.
That's right. I mean, it's a really disjointed process right now. There's a lot of lack of trust between markets. International buyers and sellers don't really know each other, and they really rely on an antiquated way of buying and selling using letters of credit. What we're trying to do really is bring transparency into the entire transaction and the process, and that includes providing trade finance, providing admissibility, providing the homologation services, as well as, and most importantly, making sure that that trust piece is there, and that we stand in the middle of every transaction to ensure that the buyer gets what they're bargaining for and the seller gets paid for what they're selling.
And a fairly ambitious business model, obviously, to pull out these operations on a global scale to really, be a global trading platform. So to do that, I guess the company's been in growth mode, and part of that includes securing more funding to kind of keep the development going, including a recent $44 million investment, I think, from AMIA. So maybe tell us a bit about that with the new capital, what that means for the company's growth plans, in particular, how that might impact Canadian dealers and your services here in Canada.
Sure. I mean, look, you're right. It's a monumental undertaking. I mean, the complexity of the trade routes and understanding the various governments and regulations and understanding how the platform can service those different trade routes and dealers and buyers on both ends of the transaction is incredibly complex. And having this investment from AMIA will allow us not only to invest in our infrastructure and our technology, but also allow us to hyperscale and look at accretive and strategic acquisitions in various markets, so we can actually accomplish our goal, which is growing organically is great, but accomplishing our goal to do it faster and to be relevant today and to take advantage of some of the opportunities that exist today within the global market and the supply and demand, and obviously the challenges that dealers and fleet companies have, especially since the pandemic.
Well, you mentioned strategic acquisitions. I know you're probably not going to name them specifically because it's probably in the midst of discussions and such. But in terms of like who would be a good fit, obviously you've got the technology that's underlying the marketplace and the relationships in place. But what types of services do you think would be a good fit to help sort of grow and maybe reach that scale that you're looking for?
So I think, without getting into it, we do have two or three right now that we're working on, and I think they will be companies that allow us to kind of grow exponentially in a market. Companies that provide experience, knowledge, as well as give us kind of more bandwidth within a certain geographic area. And we're talking anywhere from they can be importers and exporters to homologators, to shipping companies. I mean, I think that if you look at our model and the different pieces that make our pipeline work, I think that we're able to partner and strategically acquire different companies that allow us to kind of fast forward our development. Because I mean, we're not going to be everything to everyone, and I think it's important that we actually leverage the relationships that we can acquire in different markets to not only bring the hyperscale part of it, but also to bring that trust piece, because people do in various markets like dealing with people they've dealt with and who they trust.
And I mean, I'm fascinated by some of the technology and behind this. I mean, you're talking about multiple currencies, multiple language, different regulations to sort of navigate. and buyers and sellers finding one another in that ecosystem. It's sort of a giant Tinder for car sellers and buyers. How do they meet each other and trust one another and make sure all that is happening? So tell us a bit about the technology, the machine learning, and sort of the artificial intelligence in behind this.
So, I mean, if you look at Tradex and the platform, it is powered by our brain. And what the brain does is able to act as a giant repository that analyzes the data that is not only acquired through, third-party partners, but also through the dealers and what they're continuing to post on the marketplace. And what that does is allow us not only to, understand what the valuations are looking like from market to market, but also as we input values in for homologation, for shipping, for currency and exchange, it does all that, and it does it in real time very quickly to give dealers that analytics to make the best decisions they can when they're actually sourcing vehicles, when they're selling vehicles. So really what it'll do, it'll disrupt all the intermediaries that are in between the process, and allow that data to be at the hands of the buyer and the seller, so they actually not only make the most educated decision, but also make the best decision and make more profits for their own operations.
So if I'm a Canadian car dealer now and I'm thinking this sounds interesting, obviously I've got inventory I want to sell to larger markets. What do they have to do? How do they get involved? How does it work on their end in terms of just operationally?
Yeah, so it's no secret right now in Canada, there's a lot of demand for inventory. There's a shortage, obviously the pandemic and some of the issues with the chips, and obviously the manufacturers have slowed down with the supply, and I think that's coming back, and I think that's going to be a great thing. But I think as dealers get accustomed to this new environment where the value of vehicles is growing rapidly, and how dealers are in this this uncomfortable area where they're actually having to pay more for vehicles, more than they even think they're worth, and even where the valuation providers are still trying to catch up. I think it provides I think what we provide is an opportunity to offer or expose Canadian dealers to different markets. So even if they stretch on a vehicle or they buy vehicles that they normally would not have bought, as long as those vehicles are admissible and they can check that out through our software, they may not be selling locally anymore or trying to supply their market locally. And they may actually take in vehicles that they normally would not sell in their marketplace because for whatever historical reason, they didn't make sense or they just don't have the market for it. But now they can push those products out to global sellers or global buyers, and really kind of expand their reach, and push past their PMA or their primary market area or wherever they usually sell to, and look at markets like Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, where there may be pent up demand for a certain vehicle here that not everybody is looking at right now.
So you mentioned Africa, so I was going to get to that as well. But I know the U.S. is obviously a big market for Canadians that are selling. So maybe speak a little bit about the opportunity there on that front. But then also you're investing in Africa to help some of those transactions up. So maybe if you could speak to sort of the U.S. market, which is probably the first thing that would spring to a dealer's mind when you mentioned global, but then maybe to another continent really.
Yeah, so obviously the United States is a very big market for us. We started, I would say, we perfected trade between Canada and the U.S. and in the next 2 or 3 months, it's going to open up for the U.S. dealers to sell back to Canada and globally. So right now we're offering a lot of markets to Canada, so they're able to sell vehicles globally. But the U.S. has obviously been a primary source of our growth right now, and it seems to be the pond that everyone's fishing in. So in terms of dealers, it's what's driving prices up right now. It's actually, it's why dealers are paying so much, because there's such a demand in the U.S. for product that Canadians and Canadian dealers, rightfully so, are trying to fill that demand. So as we look at how to take advantage of that, a lot of dealers are buying a lot of the same cars for the U.S. market. So there's a lot of cars that dealers are not even looking at right now that make a lot of sense for markets such as Africa. And that's why we are very excited about moving into Africa, because it allows us an opportunity to service a market where there is an immense pent-up demand for vehicles. I mean, the way vehicles get to Africa and the length of time it takes to get there, and the kind of the way the trades happen there, and how dealers there have to take on a lot more risk. I think we're going to be a solution there, because what happens is Tradex allows a Canadian dealer to sell a vehicle to Africa, but they get paid in their local currency, they get paid their local taxes, and that's it. Once they sell it, they technically sell it here in Canada, and then we ship the vehicle for them to Africa, so they don't take on any risk and they don't have to worry about the vehicle not getting there or the buyer not paying. It's completely 100% guaranteed by us that that vehicle is going to be sold and properly imported into the African markets and actually achieve, what the buyer wants in Africa, which is a well-priced vehicle for their market and not a vehicle that has taken so long to get to them. I mean, there's a lot of in and around, routes to get there, and we have developed our trading routes are very strong with some of our global partners in shipping, and we plan to service that market, and we think that the demand there will far exceed what we're seeing here in the U.S. So we're really excited about that opportunity.
What's interesting, because now you're mentioning, risk, which is something that dealers are always concerned about. So it's almost like they're outsourcing some of the risk of delivery and everything else to you. You have to look at the logistics and the shipping and the regulations that, make sure all that happens, which is interesting. So for a dealer, what would be the benefit in terms of, I know every market is different, every vehicle has a different price. I don't want to, you can't say, oh, it's X amount more, but there must be some value to them if they have sort of a hot piece of inventory. They could sell it locally for, say, price X, but why would they go to Africa or to another place? Is it X plus some multiple that is just more lucrative for them?
It is, and there's a lot of a lot of vehicles right now. We're finding that it's X plus, what that margin is that they could make extra in those markets, and we also are able to expand the focus of the vehicles. Obviously the U.S. is looking for a lot of late model vehicles, where in Africa that window opens up a bit. So a vehicle that technically wouldn't have a lot of demand in the U.S. that is 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, there's a lot of demand for that in Africa. So dealers can actually widen their approach to their buying here in Canada because they have a larger audience to sell to.
Well, I love the fact that it's a Canadian success story, and I wish you guys continued success in your growth plans. And as new developments unfold and new markets are conquered, reach back out to us, and we'll see how you guys are doing. We're happy to
Oh,
share
for
the
sure.
news.
Yeah, thanks very much, Todd. Great to be
Thanks for
here.
joining us today. Signing off.